Mr Costello, thanks for your time.
Thanks, Kieran.
Australia's increased its troop deployment by 450 to Afghanistan. Can this conflict, can this operation ever actually be won, given the history in Afghanistan?
Well, look, it's something we can't afford to lose. We can't afford the Taliban to get control of the country with the risk that terrorist bases will be set up again, and that will affect our security. Bear in mind that in September the 11th, 9/11 disaster, Australians were killed in New York, and Australians are at risk from terrorists, and you've got to take out their training bases before they can execute their plans. So it's going to be a long haul, there's no doubt about that, but it's something that we can't afford to lose.
So you'd support the government in its move today?
Well, I haven't gone through the way in which everyone will be deployed, but obviously it was our government that made the military commitment to Afghanistan. That's been supported by Mr Rudd and Labor. I believe that they are doing the right thing by continuing the military engagement, and my view is we can't afford to lose.
Okay, on to the budget, and you've pointed out in a piece today in the Fairfax Press and at a book launch as well, you're making the point that the government is moving from net debt of zero to $200 billion in just 2 years.
Yes.
But the question I want to ask you is, don't Australians look at the global circumstances and think the government should be stepping in to fill the void and boost activity?
My point is this $200 billion is an enormous amount of money. I paid off Labor's last debt, which was $100 billion, and it took 10 years. So how long do you think it's going to take to pay off this $200 billion? You know, if it took 10 years to do 100, will it take 20 years to pay off 200? Who knows? It's a question that the government should be asked. Secondly, the Australian taxpayer will be paying the interest bill on that $200 billion every year until it is paid off. Right? So it's all very well to get the benefits now, family benefits, the payments to families, and the $900 cheque. That's fine. But remember this, there's an interest bill coming. That's borrowed money. The government has borrowed money, divided it up, posted it out, asked you to spend it. What it hasn't told you is there's going to be an interest bill, and it will be collecting that interest bill through your taxes for 10 or 20 years.
But the government also has the support of everyone from the IMF, Chris Richardson at Access Economics, Glenn Stevens, the governor of the RBA. They're not alone, are they?
Well, I don't know whether these people have commented on what they see as an acceptable level of debt. But, you know, I paid off Labor's last debt. It was $100 billion. It took 10 years. It was hard work. This is 200. After 2 years of Labor, they'll have got us right back into the debt situation plus double. Now, the point I'm saying to the public of Australia is this: remember, you're going to pay this. You know, it's like the Harvey Norman ad, which says no payments for 2 years. That might be right, but when those payments come in, you're going to be paying interest on those 2 years and interest right up until the time you get rid of the debt. And that's what's going to happen.
But the government is outlining its medium-term road back to surplus. It's restricting spending. It's promised to restrict spending.
What do you mean it's restricting spending? It's just spent $100 billion, Kieran.
No,
this is the other amazing thing. The government has got this line out that we're restricting spending. No, we've just spent $100 billion and now we're restricting spending.
But the point is that their promise is when growth returns to trend. Obviously, there are exceptional circumstances at the moment. But they're saying when growth returns to trend, they'll restrict spending to 2%. Real spending to 2% of GDP. So that's their commitment to get it back to surplus.
Look, what the budget will try and do is it'll try and say, oh, look, the budget will be balanced in 2 or 3 years' time, right? That's what we expect the budget to say.
What's wrong with that?
Right? Well, if the budget is balanced, you've still got the $200 billion of debt. Now, here's the question you've got to ask the government. Give us the date when the debt will be repaid. Because I think the date might be 2020, 2030. And you'll be paying interest payments right until then. Could it be right that after inheriting a federal government that had no debt, they've hocked us back for another 20 years? Could that be right? And I'm saying to the public of Australia, until you hear the date when that debt's going to be paid off, bear in mind, you're going to have the interest instalments year after year after year. These are big sums of money.
The Treasurer, Mr Swan, says, and said on Sunday, that we absolutely want to see the budget return to surplus as soon as possible. When growth returns to trend, we can then certainly bank upward revisions in revenue. And also, we've put in place a pretty tight fiscal rule of a cap of 2% real on expenditure. Now, that sounds like a plan. You're discounting that as a viable
Mr Swan said in last year's budget that we would be in surplus now. Did he not? He said we'd be $20 billion in surplus, right?
Things have changed, though, haven't they?
Okay, and what are we going to be? $30 billion in deficit. So he now says, oh, well, we'll be in surplus in, what, 2 years or 3 years, whatever.
But isn't it the biggest shock since the Depression?
The point I'm going to make to you is this. He couldn't make a promise on the budget between May and November. And now you're saying, but he's given us a promise between now and 3 years' time. All I'm saying to you, Kieran, is these promises are subject to enormous variability and volatility. He couldn't keep what he said would happen between May and November this year, and you're going to say that means we can trust him to keep what he's saying will occur in 2011 or 2012?
I'm not saying we can trust him, but I mean, there was the biggest shock since the Depression.
This is wishful thinking.
But September last year, Lehman Brothers collapsed.
Sure.
And it's been a fairly sizable
but before that,
shift.
Northern Rock had been subject to a run. Before that, Bear Stearns had to be taken over. Before that, we'd had the subprime mortgage. Kieran, let me tell you this. This didn't just appear out of nowhere in 2008. Go back on the record. I was talking about this in the Parliament all through 2007, that there was instability. Now, the government took a benign view in its May budget, and it said everything will be okay, we'll have a big surplus, right? It couldn't deliver in the space of 6 months. Now, the only reason I say this to you is they'll come back in this year's budget and they'll say, oh, well, it'll all be ready in 2 or 3 years' time. I'm just saying, remember the history. You know, if they couldn't get the outcome that they'd forecast after 6 months, what makes you think they're going to get the outcome they're forecasting over 3 years? That's my point.
The government's providing official forecasts for the next 2 years, not just the next financial year. They're saying to give transparency. Given the unusual circumstances, do you think that that's a fair argument, or is the government shifting the goalpost to suit itself?
Look, it will give forecasts over 2 years, but how good will they be? Kieran, this is my point. The forecast they gave in May of 2008 were dead by October of 2008. Dead. The 2008 budget might as well be filed in the fictional section of the Parliamentary Library. Nothing they said in that May budget